So thanks very much for the introduction. As Sidka mentioned, I work for an organization called IPES Food, the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems. I would love to tell you more about this organization and what it does, but I've only got 20 minutes to explain a very complex and wide-ranging report. So I'm going to go straight into that report. It's a report that IPES Food published with Etc. Group in 2021, entitled A Long Food Movement, Transforming Food Systems by 2045. This report is different to other reports we've produced. Typically, we will write a report and try to influence policymakers on a particular topic. But this was a bit different. It's really aimed at civil society groups, at social movements, farmers' unions, trade unions, activists, academics, and researchers, and the millions of people really working around the world to try to build sustainable food systems. And what we wanted to do in this report was to look forward 25 years from now until 2045, to describe kind of two realistic or viable kind of scenarios for where food systems could be in 25 years' time. Without doing economic modeling, but sort of visioning the future and looking at realistic transition pathways to get there. And the reason for doing that is firstly to show, well, what's going to happen if we continue on the path we're on, if corporations and other powerful actors remain in control and are able to kind of roll out the technologies and the strategies that they have planned. And alternatively, to say what could happen if we had a very different scenario led by these food movements, led by the people who are really working to change the food system on the ground. What if those groups could step up, work even more effectively than before, and really work over a longer time frame to transform food systems, what we refer to as a long food movement. So this report is it's a piece of scientific analysis. We look at a lot of changes happening on the ground right now and analyze them and think about opportunities for further change. But it's also a provocation and a call to action to those working to change food systems to really go further. And because it's this type of report, we've had about 25 different dialogues, like today, presentations, dialogues with a number of different groups in many world regions to bring this report to different people, hear their views, and try to take some of the conclusions forward. So the starting point for this report is that food movements have actually been changing the world already for decades. We have incredibly vibrant food and agricultural movements around the world who have been resisting the efforts of agribusinesses, other corporate actors, sometimes even governments, to introduce industrial food systems, to take land, and to really change the way that we produce and consume food. And in this report, the first thing we did was to scan the last 50 years and look at the different campaigns and actions and initiatives undertaken by civil society, by food movements. And we found that on so many occasions, civil society has been able to resist those changes. And that gives us great confidence for the future. And I won't go into detail here, but some of those successes involve just sustaining the kind of peasant food webs and small-scale farmer production systems and small-scale fishing systems in the face of many threats. And that can be, through seed exchanges, through farmers markets, community-supported agriculture schemes, and many of these initiatives that allow farmers to keep farming in the way they want to and to sell food at a decent price. There've also been very powerful movements to promote healthy and sustainable food. In cities in the global north and the global south, we've seen the emergence of democratic food policy councils, local citizens getting involved in deciding on the food systems they want and building the basis for a food system rooted in kind of food sovereignty. There have also been incredibly powerful campaigns to resist some technologies and some initiatives driven by corporations. We've seen, for example, 3 UN moratoria on agriculture-related technologies that have been adopted, for example, Terminator seeds, and moratoria in the Convention on Biological Diversity, protocols to the Law of the Sea. These are pieces of legislation and bits of regulation that have been adopted following intensive campaigning from civil society groups at all different levels, connecting between regions, between sectors. And obviously, yeah, fighting genetically modified crops. That's another area where civil society has been very successful. And the final point here, defending democratic governance spaces. And the most recent example is the huge mobilizations of civil society groups in 2021 to oppose the UN Food Systems Summit, which was a summit with heavy involvement of corporations and not very transparent governance. And yet again, we saw the ability of civil society groups to say no, to resist, and to show that there are alternatives to this way of doing things. And if we go back further, there are many more examples of similar protests that have been able to really challenge the agenda at major global summits, notably the WTO summits, the World Trade Organization meetings in the 1990s, where we've seen farmers come together with a broad range of citizen groups to really oppose further trade liberalization. An important note here, there have been successes, there have also been failures. There have been times when food movements and those working for food system change have not been able to prevent negative developments. But what we found is that over this past 50, 60 years, there have been really many sources for inspiration and optimism as well. In studying this kind of history of food system change and civil society's role in it, we also found that there are kind of 4 basic ingredients that are key, that have allowed civil society and allowed food movements to prevent the worst impacts and to achieve major successes. And it's those same ingredients that were important in the past that will continue to be important in the future as we face even greater challenges. And again, I won't go into lots of detail here, but and these are fairly intuitive, but collaborating across different scales. So from the very local level to the global level. And often when you have very local campaigns against land grabs, for example, there can be huge benefits when those campaigners are able to connect to the global level and gain visibility and some form of support for what's being done. Second ingredient, collaborating across sectors and different constituencies. And within food is such a broad topic. And what we found is that when food movements were able to really make a difference and resist the power of corporations, it's because you had collaboration between health groups and environment groups and anti-poverty groups and farmers groups, social movements, going all the way across the spectrum and reaching out to all different sorts of allies, including policymakers themselves, administrators, allied civil servants and scientists. And many of the positive change examples we've seen involve very broad coalitions of actors. Third ingredient of change is outlasting the opposition. And as we'll see in a moment, agribusinesses and corporations have their own long-term plans, but they also have to deliver returns on investment quarterly. There's very rapid change in the personnel in who's driving corporate strategies. In contrast, one of civil society's great strengths is the ability to kind of be there for the long haul. You have organizations who have been working in this space for so long, who have long-term commitment and expertise, and really sort of rally behind these same long-term goals. And that's what can allow food movements to really transform the system by having that long-term vision and sharing it. And the final point, and perhaps the one which is the most difficult for civil society groups to achieve, and for anyone to achieve, is being ready for change and disruption. So over the last couple of years, we've seen the pandemic and we've seen the war in Ukraine. And in both cases, these have had massive disruptions on the food system. And our insight is that it would be possible to change the food system if we were ready for these moments. And when they happened, we are ready with a set of demands, with some very clear indications for how to change the food system for the better. Because when these price shocks happen, like at present, we see that agribusiness groups and corporations are really ready to lobby for their own solutions. But we think that food movements can do the same and do it even better. So our analysis in this report found that, civil society and the world's food movements have an abundance of potential to change the food system. They are changing it on the ground already, but we're at a crossroads now, and the challenges are mounting. And first of all, the environmental challenges we face are getting more severe by the day. The current crisis caused by the Ukraine war, as everyone's aware, is causing these huge food price shocks globally. But it's not just as a result of that war. We're also seeing drought in many of the world's major cereal producing regions right now, from the American Midwest to France to Argentina, India. And these kind of droughts and threats to global food production are going to become more regular. We're going to be seeing more shocks like this. And the planetary boundaries, this is the 9 key boundaries we need to stay within to preserve the Earth's functioning. Many of those have already been crossed, and particularly where agriculture is concerned. So geochemical flows, land use, climate change, these are boundaries that are being crossed, and that's going to have major disruptive impacts. So that's a new and very pressing challenge for everyone who wants to deliver sustainable food systems. And yeah, this is creating vicious cycles of climate change, conflict, and hunger in many parts of the world. We see regions that haven't had rainfall for 3 or 4 years, combined with poor resource management. This makes those places very vulnerable to conflict. Conflicts lead to displacement, more poverty, and then more vulnerability to the kind of climate shocks that are going to come. So there are these vicious cycles taking hold, and a very, very dark and worrying outlook for many regions of the world over the next years. Despite the civil society successes I mentioned above, we see corporate power still in the ascendancy. New players coming into the sector, new technologies, and so new challenges for food movements to face in trying to keep control of food systems. I'll say more on that in a moment. And with these crises and these climate shocks, disease shocks happening, this is creating more immediate needs for social movements, civil society groups. They're having to respond to these crises as they happen. So it's difficult to say, well, we should be thinking long-term and strategizing for the long term when there are so many needs right now on the ground. So given these challenges, what we ask in the report is, can food movements still win? Can they still achieve successes to protect the food systems they want to build the sustainable food systems of the future? Can they do it with the same kind of tools and strategies as the past, or do we need a major change? And we explore this question really through two different scenarios that I'll go into very briefly in the time that's remaining. And the first scenario is looking at what will happen over the next 25 years if business as usual continues. And the second is what will happen if food movements can really show those 4 different ingredients systematically, play to all of their strengths, and collaborate in new ways across new scales and with a longer time frame than ever before. So first of all, the first scenario we looked at is a scenario called agribusiness as usual. And basically this is a pessimistic scenario where we're assuming that we carry on along the road we are now. So this is a road where civil society groups have a role, they're resisting, but agribusiness and corporate groups still very much in the driving seat and able to control the agenda, set the agenda. And what's crucial to note is that we're already seeing new technologies and new players come into food systems and being rolled out very fast. And we think there's a chance that this could really accelerate over the next few years if nothing is done, in a way that will change food systems fundamentally but with the benefits accruing to powerful actors and many risks and dangers to farmers, food workers, and the world's poorest citizens. So in this scenario, we highlight 4 key innovation pathways that are already being rolled out by corporations and kind of described as often as the 4th industrial revolution or agriculture 4.0. And these are the kind of technologies that are often highlighted in very positive terms at the World Economic Forum: digitization, automation, molecular technologies, and nature modification. And I think just to draw your attention mostly to kind of digitization and automation, there are already lots of digital applications coming into agriculture, right? There are drones already in usage to help manage the farm. There are satellite technologies providing data to farmers. But we see this, if we look at the plans of corporations and where the sector is evolving, what is envisaged is really a world where entire real world systems are managed by digital technologies, and they effectively become cyber physical systems. So this is a world where digitalization and agriculture are introduced kind of all along the chain, and the whole chain becomes manipulable and kind of controllable remotely, and kind of under surveillance. So with AI, robotics, the Internet of Things, self-driving vehicles, 3D printing, all these technologies kind of connected together in a system that then becomes kind of self-regulating and effectively has no people in it. So this is obviously a very worrying trend, and it's one towards which we're traveling pretty fast. And the agri-food sector, right today we have powerful agribusinesses who are not really working in the interests of the poorest citizens. But in the future, the situation could be even worse. We're already seeing major convergences, collaborations, partnerships between agribusinesses and the big data platforms like Amazon and Google, who are providing cloud and data processing capacities. We're seeing convergence and buy-ups of kind of e-commerce by massive e-commerce companies in the global north, buying up startups and big e-commerce firms in the global south. So this whole kind of automated food distribution is going to be spreading to other regions of the world. And quite worryingly, we see kind of asset management firms, so financial firms coming in and having a huge impact on food systems. And the 5 biggest asset management firms, including BlackRock and Vanguard, they already hold kind of 30% of the shares in today's biggest agribusinesses. So they're already in this sector calling the shots. What does this mean then for food systems?
Sorry, I have to ask you, I know there are more slides coming, but we are a little bit over time now. It's 20 minutes now. So please try to try to maybe 5 minutes if possible.
That's fine. Yeah, sorry, I'll finish in 5 minutes, no problem. Yeah, so I won't go into detail here, but this is how we see those technologies and those new powerful actors in food systems playing out over the next 25 years. This is a world where food systems are really controlled by corporations. Farmers have very little role and are effectively moved out of systems. We see governments employing geopolitical strategies that allow them to take control of kind of vast agro-industrial complexes. And we see on the consumer side, these digital technologies being applied as well in a way that really takes away people's agency and their choice in food systems. And even something called hyper nudging, which we've seen already used to manipulate elections. We see that being used a lot to really manipulate people's food choices. So this scenario is a scenario where we have kind of standardized, centralized food systems based around digital technologies, de-skilled workers, outsourcing of emissions, and really a 2-tier society where these technologies work for the benefits of very few and many people are left with very little. And critically, it's a system where there's very little resilience because we're so reliant on these centralized technologies and power is concentrated in the hands of so few. So we also mapped out a more positive scenario. I'm just going to introduce it very briefly, and I would invite you to learn more about it. The alternative scenario we call a long food movement. This is where civil society steps up and is able to show those 4 different ingredients that I mentioned earlier, is able to collaborate better in every way. So this is obviously a very optimistic scenario. And our starting point is that, you know, food movements do have those capacities. There are initiatives going on around the world to resist corporate strategies to change the food system. But movements can't win under current conditions. We can't carry on with business as usual in civil society either, because of these new corporate threats and their nature, because of resource constraints and the fact that so many groups, social movements, farmers groups, NGOs are working on kind of short timeframes, limited resources, and we're always firefighting, right? Facing immediate threats rather than being able to do long-term strategizing. So these really fundamental changes are needed to reclaim food system transformation and to build sustainable food systems over the next 25 years. We need to move from a kind of short-term campaign mentality to long-term thinking and planning, long-term funding arrangements as well. We need to move from this reactive mode to a proactive mode where we're sharing information systematically, anticipating crises before they hit. We need to move from kind of ad hoc alliances to really systematic collaboration with new spaces and new ways of co-strategizing. And all of this together can form a kind of tapestry of connected actions, not a master plan where everyone's doing the same thing, but really building synergies between the different parts. And to wrap up, we mapped out this transformation over 25 years, looking at things that civil society groups are doing already, looking at where the entry points are for further change and where we see those growing collaborations already and those opportunities for going further as circumstances change over the 2020s, as crises become more obvious, as more consumers see the problems in our current food systems and want to change, and as new technologies allow food movements to collaborate in different ways too. And those 4 interconnected pathways of transformation are the following. It's about rooting food systems in diversity, agroecology, and human rights, transforming governance from local governance, the local level, to national laws and regulations, and then global governance as well, the kind of UN bodies that have a critical role in setting the agricultural research agenda and a really important role in promoting industrial agriculture or promoting kind of agroecological alternatives. It's about shifting financial flows. That's the 3rd pathway. And this could be just introducing like taxes on junk food, but it's also about shifting agricultural subsidies away from industrial production and towards the kind of really sustainable small-scale farming organizations, and cracking down on corporate tax evasion. And finally, rethinking the modalities of civil society collaboration. That 4th pathway is crucial because it's really the question of how we do all of this. I had a final slide I'm not going to have time to present, and it's just to give you an idea and hopefully whet people's appetites to read the report. It's a report that really tries to put all of the different initiatives on one page and to say, look at the different things that are being done already by civil society groups, and let's think about how those initiatives could evolve over in 10 years time, in 20 years time, and how we could find connections between those different parts to build truly sustainable food systems. And the idea was really to hold up a mirror to civil society and say, we can change food systems. We're already changing them, and look at what we could achieve if we did all of the things we're already doing, did them better, built more connections, and collaborated more systematically. And I'll stop there. And thanks very much for your time.